Hello, I'm George White, and this is What's Left.
When I said, hey, hey, what's wrong with you? I want to turn you back to now just to see you smile. You don't gotta be there, want to be more.
Hello, I'd like to bring on our other co-hosts, Sean Halsall.
Hi, George.
Hi, Sean. And Laura Brogan.
Hi, are you all right?
Hi, Laura. How is everyone?
Oh, full of a cold at the moment, mate. But yeah, just about surviving.
I know the feeling.
Fantastic. So we've got tonight joining us Pamela Fitzpatrick, who was the independent parliamentary candidate in Harrow West during the last general election. So welcome, Pam.
Thanks, Sean, and hello, George, and hello, Laura.
Hi, Pam.
So I think Sean's introduction there was quite short, really, to list your sort of the positions that you hold and the things that you're involved with, which we'll probably get into a little bit more as we go throughout the show. So as Sean mentioned, you were the parliamentary candidate, the independent candidate in the general election. Would you mind telling us a little bit about how you came into politics and what your journey to being the candidate looked like?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've been involved in politics. For me, politics is everyday life, not just being a candidate in anything. And I grew up in Harlesden, which, for people who don't know London, is part of Northwest London. And Northwest London isn't all full of gold and diamonds as people believe. Harlesden's a very poor area, and it's always been a place that migrants have settled. And when I was growing up, the area was largely Irish and Jamaican, and a few other sort of migrants there. So I grew up in a community where most of the people, my friends' parents, who I went to school with, worked on building sites. And so I learned from a very early age the word benefits. And it wasn't social security benefits or anything like that. It was the Irish or Jamaican community coming together to have a benefit to raise money for the family of the latest person who died on the building sites. And so I came to understand the need for kind of coming together and supporting one another, but also seeing the unfairness of why were people left in this situation and why were they working in such dangerous jobs and why did nobody care? So I left school pretty young because I had to, and that's what most people did. They left school to get a job because couldn't afford to go to university. I know people talk about a golden age of, free tuition and all the rest of it. For many families that I went to school with, you would leave and you'd get a job to support the family. So that's what I did. But one of the first jobs I got, I joined a trade union. So I was very involved in the trade union movement before I even thought about joining the Labour Party. And I joined the Labour Party quite young because it was, I thought, the party of trade unions. So then I got involved in being shop steward, so quite low level, really. I didn't seek positions anywhere or anything, and that's pretty much what I did. I went to university much later in life after I had children, part-time while I was working. And then I started working in the voluntary sector, first in citizens' advice, and then kind of moving on to different organisations, always about kind of helping people who don't have a voice access their rights. And so, I've worked for organisations like Child Poverty Action Group, Citizens Advice, Family Rights Group, always focusing on the person who doesn't have a voice. And most of my work has been around benefit claimants and asylum seekers. And those are two groups that the papers like the Daily Mail and everybody else absolutely hate. So I've always been on the wrong side of the media, if you like. But in my work, I always saw that it's quite difficult working within charities because they don't like to be seen as political, and they don't understand that the issue is being party political. Everything is political. Mm-hmm. So in 2010, I'd started working on it in 2008, I think 2000. Anyway, I set up a law centre in Harrow, and it started as a small thing, but then it's grown and we've got 20 staff. And we regularly bring judicial reviews against the council for people who aren't housed, or for migrants who are refused asylum, for trafficked women, for people who are refused their benefits, go to tribunal, and regularly get people, £20,000 in arrears that they were entitled to, but it's been taken away from them. But what I very much see is that is a band-aid, and it's dealing with the individual. And even if you have a judicial review and you're really successful and you change the law, the government, whichever colour the government is, changes the law to stop other people being able to benefit. So back in 2013, I decided that I would stand as a councillor for the Labour Party then. I was still a Labour Party member, because I thought councils make lots of decisions that really impact on people's lives. And I could see the problems coming from the council and what they did, and thought very naively, I'd become a councillor and I would be able to change that. Mm-hmm. So I became a councillor. And so by this time, I was kind of considered a bit of an expert on social security. So I wrote the books that every CAB and law centres use, the CPAG National Welfare Benefits Handbook, and was also a member of the Social Security Advisory Committee, which advises Parliament. So I thought, well, I've got this knowledge I can share. So my first meeting, I spoke about the appalling council tax support scheme we were introducing, and it would be one of the worst in the country. And the response was, it's really great that you're so passionate, Pamela, but you're wrong. I was thinking, no, I'm not actually. But that was pretty much how my experience of a councillor. I could do lots of really good things, individual casework, but trying to get the Labour Party to actually change anything positive was really, really difficult. But I was kind of tolerated as, the only socialist in the village type thing. And that's fine. We're not going to worry about you because you're not dangerous, are you? You're just a nice lady who works at the law centre and all of that. But in 2015, we obviously had the election for the leader in the Labour Party. And as soon as Jeremy said that he was going to stand, I knew that if he got on the ballot, he'd win. Because the mood of it wasn't Jeremy that created the movement, it was the movement pushing Jeremy up because they needed that. So I set up Harrow, well, not just me, 4 of us set up Harrow for Corbyn. And the first meeting we had was just the 4 of us. And then the next meeting we arrived at the local Labour Party constituency office, and there was a queue all around the block. And we sort of advertised it, but not much. And we were thinking, oh no, they think Jeremy's here, oh my God, what are we going to say? In fact, they didn't. We dragged all these socialists out of Harrow, of all places, wanting change. And so that then became quite a movement. And then when Jeremy actually became the leader, that's when all my problems with the Labour Party started. So suddenly I wasn't seen as, the nice lady who wasn't dangerous at the law centre. Suddenly I became public enemy number 1. And so I had lots of problems thereafter with the Labour Party. I was the Labour candidate in Harrow East in 2019 and came second to Bob Blackman, unfortunately. But we had a lot of, like other people, dirty tricks, not from the Tories, but from the Labour Party and the councillors who were supposed to be supporting me. So, that's, where else am I? I got involved with the Peace and Justice Project. I was asked to join there as a director, and I did that about 2 years ago. So I've been involved in that. I've continued as a trade unionist, so I'm chair of my local branch. So that's me, really. I suppose always been political and held a few seats doing things as well. But I'll stop now. You can ask about that.
It's really interesting you talk about like the housing issues and stuff like that, where I had a similar sort of story, not timeline. I was a bit later to the party. Very similar though, trade unionist first and foremost, then kind of got talked into joining the Labour Party through my union. Then talked into standing for councillor by the trade union, and sort of got elected in 2019. The minute I was elected, I then sort of become public enemy number 1 myself. I think we see you in the meetings as sort of in a bit of a box, so it's nice to have the token working unionists in the meetings, but don't give them any power, because don't start letting them move motions that might improve things for anyone. But it's interesting now that we see sort of people like Jazz Athwell, these landlords, slum landlords, allegedly, who are treating people horrifically, but these are people who are meant to create legislation for the rest of us.
Yeah.
To me, it's very dangerous politics to leave that space open. So I suppose my next question is how much worse do you think politics in the country has got since 2019, since that election that was stolen from us by the Labour Party?
I mean, it's been pretty bad all the time, hasn't it? I mean, I think the difference now is that we have very few politicians of integrity at all, do we, that have any power. And if you look around, the Labour Party, is there anybody that's independent minded? There's not. It's been clones of Starmer that have been selected and put into safe seats. If you look at the Tory party, look at who's in the leadership selection. I mean, it's really quite frightening. The Lib Dems, I know they had a bit of a resurgence, but it's more about people just being fed up with Labour and the Tories. They haven't really got a presence. So it's pretty grim, I would say, at the moment. If you think back, even under Blair, they had kind of politicians with some conviction. And there's a story that I do tell, because you know how we saw just recently at the Labour Party conference, that young man being rough-handled, chucked out, probably going to be expelled from the party. A friend of mine in Harrow, Steve Forrest, he was at that meeting where Walter Wolfgang was dragged out of the Labour Party conference when he shouted out something to Jack Straw, and it was fairly minor. And Steve came to his kind of assistance, and Steve and Walter were arrested under anti-terrorism legislation. Anyway, it had a huge response, a public response. The press were outraged. Tony Blair, who I couldn't stand, he invited them for tea the next day and gave a public apology. And that would never happen now. The politicians we have no principle. I'm not saying Tony Blair did, but he kind of knew which side to play the media, I guess. I mean, it's just appalling what we've got now, and we've had, it's almost like they read a script, but they don't believe they've got to adhere to it. So all this stuff about honesty in the service of the public, where they've done anything but, the Labour Party, and they don't get it. They're kind of looking really bemused as to why are people angry that we're taking all these freebies. It's quite shocking.
I think as well that the MPs that voted against voted to repeal the two-child cap and subsequently got suspended from the Labour Party, and then going on to the vote on the winter fuel allowance. But I think even previously, when there were sort of contentious things like that the Labour Party wanted to support or not support, that the Labour MPs of conscience who rebelled against that wouldn't be pariahs in the party and hoofed out. They'd probably get a stern talking to off the whip, and then they'll draw a line under it. It seems like it's now a life and death sentence for even daring to think outside of the parameters.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it just shows what a lack of, confidence, of just skill that most of them have. So they've got to quell any kind of dissent. And if you think, I was expelled from the Labour Party by giving an interview to Socialist Appeal because I had actually applied to be the General Secretary of the Labour Party, and I was interviewed for that position. I didn't get it, surprisingly, when Keir Starmer was leader. They appointed David Evans instead of me. But during that time, lots of the left organisations were asking me, what would you do if you became General Secretary? So the organisation Socialist Appeal asked to interview me, and I gave them an interview. And then 2 years later, Labour prescribed that organisation, then applied the rules retrospectively to me to expel me, which is really surreal, given I work in a law centre, and you think about this is just bizarre. But what the point of that was, Socialist Appeal had been in the Labour Party for a long time, and it was tolerated. I mean, Tony Blair just thought, it's just one of these left fringe organisations like all the other kind of Marxist organisations. It wasn't seen as a threat in that way. It wasn't like Militant was, where they did feel that that was a threat. So it's just everything they do shows how lacking in any vision, competence, or anything else really, which doesn't bode well for us.
No, and picking up on that, I think we mentioned a couple of minutes ago, like the previous 2017, 2019 elections. And I remember, and you all will probably remember as well, the huge feeling of hope that a lot of us had that there would be positive change for the majority of working class people, that things would improve and that things within politics would improve, and that then would benefit people en masse. So a change from that feeling of hope to where we are now today, and not just within the Labour Party, because I left myself at the end of last year, and but as across politics now, how do you think that feeling of hope versus despair, where do you think we are at the moment? Because I know sort of out of despair comes a lot of opportunity for new things to come along, or where do you think we are at the moment?
So after the 2019 general election, I did quite a lot of other people did, and took to my bed in my Unite hoodie, if you remember those, we've got your back, and felt so depressed, and felt quite depressed for a long time after. Because all of this terrible stuff going on, no hope at all. I knew that Starmer would be bad, but even some of my friends were taken in by him because he was a lawyer, people who work in the same field as me, but it's a human rights lawyer. I knew he would be terrible because he was terrible as the DPP, terrible in all sorts of things, really. And for quite a lot of the time, I wanted to leave Harrow because I just felt the people here, my MP had behaved so badly to me, as was revealed in the Labour files, and the councillors, and I just thought it was terrible. So with all that going on, and I didn't get a sense of hope from the general election coming. And what I found, so it's mixed really for me and what I think the general public is. So when we were knocking on doors, people are so, in the 2024 general election, people are so disillusioned by all the major parties. And when we knocked on the door, originally they would say, no, go away, we're not interested. As soon as we said, I'm an independent candidate, they said, we'll vote for you. And we had some people who were going to vote Reform because they were sick to death of everybody. So I would say the general public is pretty demoralised with politics, has no faith in them. And Starmer has compounded that by all these freebies, by lying, by his actions, with whether it's from Gaza to the winter fuel payment, now talking all these things, people are worried about the budget. So he's compounded that lack of hope and trust in people. But for me, I found a sense of hope from the general election, actually, because there's this, I can see that people want change. So I've never been one that felt, we've had how many left parties start, or independents don't usually do that well. But there is that sense that we are at a pivotal moment of change. So for me, I do feel a personal sense of hope that we can change things and that now is the time. So it's a bit of a muddle for me, really. I think, most people say it's never been worse, really. But it's got to get worse before it gets better, I guess.
And I think as well, I mean, we've spoke on the podcast before about the collective and the work that's going on there, and sort of the backing I got through there. I would agree entirely. I think since sort of working with other like-minded people, independents across the country, that has given me hope, because for the first time sort of in my lifetime of organising on the left, it seems like we're actually finally near enough all on the same page and ready to actually do this, and not spend half these hour meetings trying to tear each other to pieces. So do you want to talk a little bit about the work yourself have been doing on the collective, Pam?
Yeah, so the collective started really with a small group of people associated with the Peace and Justice Project. And what we wanted was, we saw the need for a new party, a class-based party, so not getting focused on other kind of issues that bring people into kind of arguments about single issues, and on the left, obviously. So we decided we didn't want to do it top down, that it had to be bottom up. So started reaching out to people who were already working in their communities to get them involved, to see whether they have the same kind of desire to see a new left party. And we've kind of grown. It's been going on for about a year, and we have had regular meetings, and Sean is now involved in that. And we've got to the point where we had a meeting on the 15th of September, and we agreed we do need a new party, and we're just trying to work through the mechanics of that now as to when and how. So the collective currently is just a company that was set up so that we could raise money to help support candidates during the general election and local elections and by-elections. But it won't remain like that as a party. So the party will be a proper party structure that is democratic, and the leadership will be democratically elected by members. And, policies and everything else debated and decided on by members. So rather than create everything and say, here it is, do you like it? Join. It's been done the other way. And I know that's frustrating for some people because they just keep saying, well, what are you about? Are you this? Who's the leader? Is Jeremy the leader? Is this person the leader? And we don't have a leader yet, because that will come about through democratic process. So that has been really positive with working with like-minded people, and to see that we've worked together for almost a year now, where people have put aside their individual kind of, whether it's a party or local organisation, and have been willing to compromise for the greater good, really.
And is there a plan for it to have, similar to how the Labour Party was and should be, but the structure where there's affiliated trade unions to the party? Or
we would definitely want that. Now, at the moment, obviously, lots of the trade unions are affiliated to the Labour Party, so they wouldn't come over. But we have lots of trade unionists involved in the collective, whether people like me and Sean, but also more senior people who are kind of in the background, but their union hasn't come, on board fully. But that's the aim, because the trade unions will get fed up with the Labour Party as well. I know they've been given a bit of, thrown a few crumbs, and they hope that that will be enough to keep the unions on board. But I do hope and believe that the membership will drive the leaders of unions to say, we're not happy with this, and that eventually they will come on board. Because, my heart is in trade unions, always has been. And so I think we need that. So we are talking to trade unions all the time.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest reason why a lot of them trade unions still sit with Labour is because where is the alternative at the moment? You can't completely divorce yourself from politics, and because trade unions are inherently a political force. I think, honestly, if we have a credible alternative, that will be enough to push a lot of the trade union members to think, why are we still flogging a dead horse with Keir Starmer and his 70, 80 grand clothes bills, when there's an actual organisation here that is going to represent and speak for working class people, because there just isn't anything in politics at the moment that is addressing people's material needs. And like you said, I think it's so important that we remain rooted in class politics and don't allow ourselves to be dragged away from that.
I think there was a period in history as well when the trade unions sort of affiliated to or went with the radical liberals, and we're getting, I would imagine, the same sort of feelings as people are getting about the Labour Party at the moment. And it still took a long time for that, because they were so wedded to the radical liberal MPs. It took a long time for that to transit over to an actual socialist party and aims of the Socialist Party and the Labour Party.
Yeah, absolutely. They weren't on board at the start. I know, and obviously it came about from the trade unions, but yes, I mean, not dissimilar to what's happening now. I hope that the trade unions, once they see there is an alternative, as Sean said, that they will come on board.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is the one piece of the puzzle missing, because, as you said earlier, there's been very few times in this country's history where the Labour Party is just so blatantly sort of shredded up any social contract with working class people that there is nothing there that represents them. If there isn't something that appears quickly, then parties like Reform and who knows, parties further to the right of the Reform that could be organising now will fill that void in space. And we see how that has gone throughout history, where the far right mobilise working class communities.
I mean, having been in the Labour Party a long time, I've obviously campaigned over a lot of elections, general elections, local elections, European elections. I have never known a time, any time, but particularly where we have a government that was so hated as the Tory government, that the opposition were just as hated. It's incredible to me that they managed to do that. And they did. It's such a wasted opportunity. I mean, Starmer could have come in and did what he said he was going to do to get the leadership, and he probably would have won. That was what was needed anyway in the country. They would have thought it's a change, but no, he's just not interested in wider society. It's just power for power's sake, really.
Yeah, that majority as well. It's a blank check, isn't it? He could have done some transformative things and had 5 years to do it. Instead, we're freezing pensioners and starving kids. It's absolutely insane to me to see how quickly they've sort of plummeted in the polls. Like it's almost impressive to see how badly they're doing this quickly.
I know. Well, they're lucky they've got such a large majority, because they wouldn't be in government for very long otherwise, would they? It's so unpopular.
That to me is what's so offensive about it. That there is, we're at a time now where people are probably in some of the worst situations that we've seen for a long time. We're coming out of the pandemic, and we've got like record numbers of homelessness, record numbers of children in poverty, record numbers of pensioners in poverty, and then to off the back of that go, actually all these people who are already struggling, let's have them take more of a burden by stripping back anything, any bit of help that they might have been getting, or any bit of hope for help that they might have thought would come along with the new government.
Absolutely. I mean, that's why I think we so desperately need a new party, and quickly. And I know there's different views. You'll hear some people saying, oh no, what we need is to organise in our communities and help with food banks, or, we're going to set up something that will look at challenging the council or holding it to account. I can tell you there is no better organisation for holding councils to account as law centres, because they've not only got an understanding of the law, but they've got the power to go to court with legal aid contracts. And we do it all the time. It doesn't change things, though, for the good, because, if you talk about housing where they're not housing somebody, or they're sending somebody from Harrow to Coventry because there's no housing, we can challenge that and they'll bring the person back and they'll get a house. But it doesn't change the fact that they haven't got any money, and we know they haven't got any money, and that's the same of all the councils, and only a government can change that. So unless you have some power to do some good, then it's just pointless. And we've been organising in our communities. I've been doing it since I was a teenager. I don't know about other people, but I'm sure there's lots of others like that. And people are crying out for something tangible that we can actually make a change. There's sort of wealth of food banks and things is disgusting. I can't stand food banks, honestly, because people I see that come to the law centre, they don't want to go to a food bank. They want the money in their pocket that they can buy what they want, not be sent to a queue of, in a food bank. But
yeah, it's just about giving people dignity, isn't it? And people, like you say, are crying out for help, but people don't want a handout. Something like you say, they want dignity. They want to be able to, be sufficient themselves. And it's all, like you say, it's good and well saying organising your community, do these community initiatives, but it doesn't help the wider issue. And a lot of the time, the people that are helping in these community initiatives haven't got very much themselves either, and are using the last bit of something that they've got to be able to help somebody else. It's not a long-term solution.
No, and I was in a local supermarket the other day, and they've got a trolley full of bags for the food bank, and then they buy a bag of food for the food bank and help, people who are struggling. You think, well, why don't you, big supermarket with millions in the bank, give the food until everyone else can do it? Because you're just making more of a profit out of people's poverty. It's the whole thing. And then I see, not all, obviously, some people do it with absolute good motive, But I get sick to death of people being awarded for their charitable work. It shouldn't be charity, you know, getting a whatever OBE or whatever it is because they've devoted so much time. But if you know, it's like that quote, if I say, you know, why hasn't somebody got food, that you're treated as you're a communist or whatever, you know, but why are we allowing this to happen when so many people have got so much money, but so many people are so poor? And it goes back, certainly in London, to housing is part of the problem because of the cost of housing, and they're doing nothing about the housing crisis, and Labour is doing nothing about the housing crisis, you know, the tinkering at the edges, and unless they build proper council housing, it's just more profit for private investors.
Yeah, and there's got to be investment housing all across the country, but also having a look at maybe manufacturing some of our own stuff again, maybe some of it up in the north of England.
Absolutely.
Then you haven't got to sort of go down to London to find high paid work. People can afford to stay where they are, work where they are, and families aren't forced to sort of send your kids to London off to go and find them streets paved with gold.
Absolutely.
And you're not putting as much pressure on the housing then as well in London. If you've got good quality work up north, where there is patches of it where there's good engineering jobs, but it's few and far between.
I think those sort of that vision to look for those things has gone now. It seems like a lot of the still the grandees in the Labour Party will you know, want to claim the trophy of we're the party that created the NHS, etc. But I think that those policies would find you at odds with the party these days. You know, I can imagine where you know, where would Nye Bevan have been on you know, 2-child benefit cap or on freezing pensioners. And then look, going back to one of the things that you sort of said at the beginning about being able to go to university as an adult and do it at night school. Again, a radical outcome changing Labour Party policy to create the open university and the open colleges so that people could, you know, it opened up the ability for working class people to be able to get the further and higher education. Again, things that I think would be too radical at the moment to fit into the framework of the party. And then just one final little thing where you said about food banks and about the sort of dignity of you know, the lack of dignity of charity. Would just like to call to attention as well where the Black Panthers in the United States had a food program where people were encouraged to register to vote and they would get a food parcel, which, and also the children's breakfast programs. Again, both of those, which actually fulfilled, you know, a class need. Kids, you know, are getting worse outcomes in school, but also linked it into the politics to say, here's your brown paper bag with your chicken in it, but register to vote and vote for us, and we can change.
Absolutely, I'd agree with that because, you know, at least you get some change, but this is not happening. And you've hit the nail on the head really about, you know, that they would be appalled by the policies of the old Labour Party. They steal our history, basically. And I can remember in Harrow, there was a showing of Pride, you know, the movie. And they were all saying, oh, yes, this was us. But they all, right-wingers, back then they hated the people who were sort of, you know, the socialists, anybody. They just steal that history. The same with the NHS or anything else, really. You know, the miners' strike. Which side were they on then? It drives me mad. It really does. But, you know.
It's really
seems to have no shame, the right wing in the Labour Party. They'll just use it again and again.
It's interesting you brought up Pride. We actually had Mike Jackson, the real Mike Jackson from Pride, on here about a year ago now. That was it must have been about a year ago. He mentioned he sort of went off on a tirade about Keir Starmer. I hadn't mentioned to him I was still a sitting Labour councillor at the time.
Yeah.
I sort of saw my life in the Labour Party flash before my eyes.
Yeah.
Probably a little bit over a year now, yeah.
Yeah. I know, that's shocking. I mean, the thing is, there have been really good people in the Labour Party who've struggled for change and were altruistic. And then you've got the careerists who they come straight from universities. You know, all they're interested in is a position as a parliamentary candidate, and that's it, really. And we've seen it, you know, now, like when you asked earlier, is politics so much worse now? I have questioned myself about whether I was just so naive in the past that I didn't know this was going on and that it was all going on with abundance, but I was just, you know, naive. And now I'm fully wide, awake to what's going on. So I was always a socialist, but I kind of thought, there's right wingers in the Labour Party, but they're harmless. I don't agree with them, but I certainly don't think that anymore. So, and I think a lot of people, to use a word that is provocative, have been radicalized in a way because they've seen the hypocrisy, the lies, the unfairness, and that people are not working for the good of the country or people. They're working for the good of themselves. And we're seeing that in abundance from the last Conservative government and now from this Labour government.
So there's a saying about it's actually about trade union officials that they're like rusty wheelbarrows. They will go, but you have to give them a push to get them started. But I would transpose that across to politicians.
Yeah.
Part of this is our fault because the class movements, the trade unions haven't pushed the politicians. So the politicians get the pressure from whoever doesn't want them to make the changes that are necessary. But we sort of, I don't know, at a particular point in time, we stopped pushing them as hard. The thing that sort of springs to mind for me is, we look back at the Attlee government, the 1945 government, and we look at the massive council house building programme that was there. And that was pushed for. Immediately after the end of the war, there was a huge movement of people occupying. It was occupying disused army bases, but also occupying some of the mansions that the extreme wealthy of places like Mayfair and Knightsbridge had evacuated themselves from during the war. And this was ex-service people who were coming back and going, We've just fought and won a war. We're not having it anymore, and that then forced the Labour government to do more than they had planned to do around house building and bring it forwards to make it more immediate. It's where a lot of the prefab estates actually came from, because it wasn't a pie in the sky. We'll get round to it. It was we've got to have this on an immediate timescale.
I think from that. A big part of it was Bevan was kind of stitched up, I believe, with the housing and healthcare portfolio, and they wanted them to fail. And it's another example of a trade unionist actually doing what working class people needed and delivering for them on two fronts there, and probably creating two of the things the Labour Party can be most proud of. Although not this iteration, I'd say almost every iteration before it. These lot have stole the clothes of that version of the Labour Party now.
I think with housing, though, what is appalling of politicians, and again, both the Conservatives and Labour have done this, is they keep talking about the housing crisis and then they equate it to migrants. And we saw what's happened, it has been terrible. And of course, it's got nothing to do with migrants. We have an abundance of housing, as I'm sure you do in your area, but nobody can afford to live in it. And they're building more and more of these tower blocks and ruining green spaces. But I could put up with that if it was council housing, it was actually housing people. But they're being marketed to places like Singapore and other places and being told this is a good investment. Don't bother with other investments. Housing is much better. And so then people who are waiting for housing and being told people are coming in and getting housing, which they don't. But also, I was working in welfare rights back in 1997 when the Labour government came in, and they promised to make the system for asylum seekers fairer. And at that time, only, I think it was about, I can't remember, a certain percentage of asylum seekers could get housing and benefits and things if they claimed asylum at the port of entry. And so what Labour did to make it fairer was to make sure that no asylum seekers could access public housing or benefits. And what they did then was to say, you're going to be dispersed away from London and the southeast, and you're going to be sent to northern towns and cities, which had already been decimated by those industries having been closed. And so you've then got an influx of people, I don't know, being housed in temporary accommodation, whatever. And it's just ripe. And then blaming those migrants for all of these issues has caused what we have today. And it's disgraceful of them. And if only we had some politicians, you know, we've talked about the caliber of politicians being dreadful, but they actually lied to people as well. So they should be saying, it's untrue. Asylum seekers are not the reason that you haven't got a house. It's because we haven't got any council housing. And the price of housing is outside everybody's reach. You know, when I was younger, ordinary working class people could save up, even in London, and could buy a property. It seems unheard of now that anybody could do that. You've got to be very wealthy yourself or have rich parents to do it. So I think also, as more and more people are realising that all the housing that's being built is not addressing the issue, again, more people are becoming aware and thinking, well, what's going on? And so will want that, the policies that we will be advocating. They might not like the name socialist, but they are popular because it's what's needed.
It's funny you mention about, migrants or asylum seekers being blamed for the issues with housing, because we saw it as well in the press. I think it's about a week or so ago, being blamed for the issues within the NHS and any issues really, but it was particularly pertinent to me because my grandma, she's 95, she was taken into hospital about 2 weeks ago. She'd had a fall. So we had a 26-hour wait for an ambulance when we called the ambulance. And she waited another 12 hours to get into a bed when we got into hospital. But while we were in the waiting room, a number of the other patients who were also waiting, you know, had had similar wait, were talking about an article that I think was in the Daily Mail saying, oh, well, you know, if we were an asylum seeker who came here and couldn't speak English, we'd be straight to the front of the queue, which was, you know, the topic of this Daily Mail article. And you think, look around you, we're all sat here in this waiting room. And then we get onto the wards, there's more beds in the wards than should be in the wards. There's the smallest amount of staff that I've ever seen in a hospital ward, you know, 4 or 5 nurses to about 30 people, you know, all really struggling. You think you're looking around here, you're seeing that with your own eyes, but because this is painted for you in, you know, front page newspaper, you attribute it to, you know, other people who are also as desperate as you, actually more desperate and more frightened because they can't understand what people are saying to them.
No, absolutely. It's just horrible. I can't stand it. And because, you know, I know the reality of what asylum seekers can get, and it's very little. And the accommodation they're in is appalling and overcrowded, often not fit for kind of human habitation. And yet it's portrayed as though they're in luxury accommodation. It's the people who are benefiting out of that are the landlords again, who are making a fortune. I think there was an article recently saying there were billionaires out of asylum accommodation. It just is shocking. And we see the same with the NHS now with the shortages. And people say, well, we don't want to pay more tax. Well, I'm pretty sure if we didn't be paying all this money out of the NHS to private providers, we wouldn't actually need to be taxing people so much because their greed is endless. And I don't know about you, but every time I've been to the local GP recently for something, they've sent me to a private provider. So when Keir Starmer says, oh, I would never use the private sector, we're all having to because the NHS is using it. So how much money is being wasted on these private entities? And the same with care homes, with loads of money being made out of people, you know, who've got dementia and their families who can no longer care for them at home. It's just shocking. And it's so easy to see what needs to be done. And that's what I see in my day job and what's driven me to sort of go into politics, really, in terms of trying to get elected to change things. But
yeah, I think as well on that, children's services as well is another one that, as a councillor, You see the costs it takes to have children in care. Some of these kids, we would save money if we sent them for full board and education at Eton. And that is like, you would give a kid the best education in the country. I mean, I wouldn't force education on anyone. I think it's one of the biggest evils in society. But these kids aren't growing up for the money that is being spent. They're certainly not getting anywhere near the outcomes that we would expect and the care that the kids deserve, frankly. People just being let down everywhere, from healthcare, childcare, housing, the whole lot.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what's so depressing. And again, as we said earlier, the need for a new party that will change things, because nothing is going to be changed by community organising or food banks. It just isn't. You know, no matter how nice it is, no matter how involved you get people. And we can't wait another 5 years for this. We can't have, after this Labour government, reform or the Tories coming back or an even more right-wing Labour government. Can't do it.
Just while we're talking about that, Pam, I'm just going to throw up onto the screen now. That's the collective's website, we-r-collective.org. And on Twitter or X at @wearecollective without the E _. So give them a follow and join and see what's going on. And hopefully, as Pam says, before too long, we'll have ourselves a new vehicle, a nice new shiny one, which is actually socialist, and we can deliver change for the people who deserve it of this country, frankly, and stop penalising and marginalising often the most vulnerable.
George, you look like you wanted to come in before Sean went on his advertisement section.
Well, I was just going to do a call back to something that Pam said quite early on in the recording, that who actually built Britain, and going to Laura's point about of all places to be complaining about migrant labour within the NHS, which runs on migrant labour. But going back to Pam's point at the beginning, where she was growing up, around the most of the people were either Irish or Jamaican, and most of them worked in the building trade. Who actually built Britain? Who actually built the roads, the council houses, the hospitals, the infrastructure, the schools, everything? And it's not, you know, it's not people whose ancestors came across with William the Conqueror, is it?
No, I mean, the same with the NHS. Who staffs the NHS now and then? And it was quite funny because one of my old school friends, their mum died, sadly. It was lots of Irish people came to this funeral. We haven't seen people for ages. But anyway, my friend was wheeling his dad in a wheelchair and bumped into something, a pothole or something, and he fell out and he cut his head. It's not funny, but there was almost about 30 nurses suddenly appeared from the Irish funeral, all with their first aid bags and saying, "Oh, I worked it all through. We'll get him through quickly." Quite stereotyped, but that is the reality. It was people, migrants then, migrants now, who are staffing the NHS, who've built the community. You know, it's Romanians on building sites now. I mean, there's less since we left the EU, but it's still largely migrants who have built things, who've done the jobs that people don't want to do, you know, and more, and think about what it's brought to this country. And just, I don't know. They've done a good job at pitting working class against one another, haven't they? And that's what we need to tackle. And the media is a big problem, which it's hard to do something about. But our politicians are an even bigger problem because they reinforce that message and they give it legitimacy, and they should be, you know, crying out that it's not true.
And it's something capital's always been very good at, dividing working class. Even when those Jamaican and Irish workers were building all the things, we saw the no dogs, no blacks, no Irish. And my grandmother came over from Kilkenny to work in the NHS herself. So I'm very proud of sort of them links into history. But yeah, people from outside this country, the people who often are propping up the economy and society, are the one who are often scapegoated the first and quickest. And yeah, nothing really changes. It's just the messaging and the target, maybe.
I think as well. Sorry, Bob. I think as well though the problem is there identified, and the solution isn't anything new. We've just seemed to have shied away from it. I don't know. Something happened. Something happened probably in 1979, and we forgot how to do this. But political parties used to educate their members and go out and seek members, people to become members by educating them. And trade unions would educate their members. There's I think we sort of touched on it before as well about the number of trade unionists who might end up being something like reform voters or conservative voters. But it's not in a way, it's not their fault, because we haven't done anything to tell them where they're going wrong and to evaluate the things that are going on and give them any of the answers or allow them the tools to find their own answers. We've just sort of become passengers to this. We haven't become, we haven't set the destination and sort of set off for it, have we?
I think that's absolutely right. And part of it is kind of because so many people work in 0 hours contracts where there's no trade unions, there's not time to organise in the way that perhaps we did, when I was younger. It was quite the norm to go to a workplace and there be a trade union. It's more unusual now. There's less big industries or whatever. And people don't have the time. Some are working 2 or 3 jobs to meet the housing costs that they've got to pay. So they're just exhausted to give time. But also, I think when people do get involved, there's quite often a patronising kind of approach to working class people. If they use the wrong terminology, if they get something wrong, if they say something wrong or they question something, rather than a proper sort of discussion and sort of education, they'll feel kind of that they can't say something. And I think that happened with organisations like Momentum, that people didn't feel really, that it was really genuinely a working class movement, basically. It was seen as very middle class. And so it didn't get that groundswell of people. And that's what we have to avoid with any new party, that people do feel that they are part of it, really, and that they will have a genuine say. But we have to have that political education all the time.
Yeah, I think you're right there, Pam. And the Momentum thing, it always felt very middle-class student politics to me. And I think one thing where, the trade union leadership in Unite certainly Row was very behind Corbyn. I don't think there were structures set up where to engage people and get them more involved. The political strategy didn't seem to move as quickly as it perhaps could have done. And I think because of that, the groundswell in the trade union movement wasn't quite there. And by the time it was getting there, the sort of Momentum lot had already ingrained everywhere. And there were some good comrades involved in the organisation, but I don't think they ever quite understood trade unions, certainly, but class politics at its heart.
Absolutely. And all this kind of like voting online and things like this, you need proper debates to understand things, and meetings, and for people to be able to say the wrong thing and kind of change their views is important.
I think, as we mentioned, like society, the structure of society has sort of changed, and the structure of like the family has changed. So people haven't got time that they've had previously, and I think that's something that we need as a movement to look at, sort of going forward. I was a single mum for a long time. I had a baby when I was 18, so we were on our own for a lot of the time. So I come at a lot of things from that sort of standpoint, and we need to understand the barriers that are stopping people from engaging, coming into meetings. I was very interested in the Labour Party. I was a member from very young, but I couldn't come because I had a young child. Now things like Zoom are around. We can facilitate people to do things from within their own home. So we can make meetings, education, debate, and people being engaged within party structures more accessible to a wider range of people. And I think that might be why a lot of people are disengaged, because they haven't got the time or the resources to be able to access and be involved in those things.
Definitely. And if you haven't got a car, going out, at night, somewhere dark, you're worried about getting home, or you haven't got the bus fare or the train fare, people don't think of that. And I've heard people say, it's only £2.50. I think it's £2.50 somebody hasn't got. You don't understand that, do you? It's, anyway.
But hopefully, well, we've discussed there is hope. And I think that's a good thing to end on. There is hope. There are people that do want to make a difference, and things are coming. Things are in the works. And people are actively working on that. And just having a quick look at the time, it might be a good way to wrap up, really, that things are on the up. Things are, there is potential for change. People are hungry for change.
Yes, so before we go again, the we-r-collective.org, and on X or Twitter @wearecollective without the E _. Thank you so much, Pam. It's been fantastic chatting.
Well, thanks, Sean. It's been lovely to meet you, Laura and George. So
Thank you, Pam.
thanks for inviting me.
So thank you to all our listeners, and we will see you next time.